Good morning, everyone. This is our very first live video in the group. I'm excited. So for those of you who are watching the replay, thanks for joining in. Okay, so are you wondering if you should A, do the delayed cord clamping, or should you B, do the cord blood banking? And what I'm hoping that you're going to get out of this video is some real clarity about the benefits and the risks so that you can make the right decision for you and your baby. So that's what we're doing today. All right. So my name is Berwald, and I help women like you live a better pregnancy and a better birth experience. So if you find at the end that this video has value for you, please go ahead and share it, tag your friend, do all that good stuff. Okay, so first, I think the first thing that we need to get clarity about is what is this cord blood and why does it even matter? Why is it important? So first of all, the cord blood has stem cells in it, and it also is rich in iron. Those are some of the important things to think about. Now, when a baby is in utero, they have up to a full third of their total blood volume in the placenta. So you have to kind of think of the baby and the placenta as a complete unit. And when they're in utero, a fair amount, like up to a third of their total blood volume, think about it, that's a lot of blood, is inside of the placenta. Now, if for an adult, if you were to take a third of your blood out of your body, you would hit the ground, because we couldn't function with a third of our blood volume missing. The reason that a baby can function is because the placenta is doing many of the jobs that the organs will later do. So there's three big organs that the placenta does the work for. So the liver, the kidney, and the lungs. Now, these are three organs that use a lot of blood in our body. But during the pregnancy, the baby doesn't need those organs. They don't need any blood to be going to the liver, to the kidneys, or to the lungs, because the placenta is doing all that work for a baby. Now, during the birth, what happens is that the placenta starts to send that blood through the cord to baby, right? And it doesn't get all the blood into baby by the time baby is born. There's actually a fair amount of blood that is still in the placenta when baby first emerges. And I thought it would be really good to actually show you how much blood is still in the placenta, because it's a lot. It's more than you would think, especially when you think of a baby. Like, a baby's not, a newborn's not that big. So this is the average, just taking the average of a baby's size at birth and then the average amount of blood that is still in the placenta. So let's take a look. So a baby has a total blood volume of about 450 mils, right? And after the baby is born, that blood is going to travel from the placenta through the cord. The remainder of that is going to travel through the placenta, from the placenta through the cord to baby. So let's take a look. So this right here is, I don't know if you can see this, I'll maybe try to get it close. This is 100 milliliters. So I kind of took the average because they're in the placenta, there can be anywhere between 80 to about 130 milliliters of blood. So think about that. That's quite a bit of blood volume that the placenta is holding for baby. And it is baby's blood. I think it's important to remember that. That blood does belong to baby. Now, when the baby is born, the placenta will continue to pulse and push that blood into baby's body. And that process can take anywhere between 2 minutes and 5 minutes, generally speaking, to become complete. You know that it's complete because when it's complete, the placenta the cord itself stops pulsing. So there's a very easy way to tell. Now, why would your baby want that blood? Well, that blood belongs to them. So if they don't get it, they need to remake it. And of course, remaking a third of their total blood volume in their first day of life puts a little bit of stress onto the baby's whole systems. And we really see this, you know, in babies that are like preterm, because they're having a little bit more troubles just adjusting to being outside of the uterus to begin with. So, you know, we've seen some real big benefits for having that cord blood, you know, move into baby's body, especially with like preterm babies. So with preterm babies, the research is showing a reduced rate of, I'm gonna hope I say this right, intraventricular hemorrhage. That's basically a blood bleed inside of the baby's body. There's a reduced risk of needing any blood transfusions. There's increased hemoglobin in the first day of life, and there's a reduced risk of anemia. And actually those benefits are there for term babies as well. It's just that they can make that transition a little easier. But that increased iron stores is really an interesting piece of it. So what happens is that during pregnancy, your body will put baby first. So your body is going to give the available iron to your baby so that your baby's blood is really rich in iron. And that's really important because in the first year of life, there's not a lot of dietary places that a baby will get iron from, right? And you know, for first foods, historically humans have started babies, of course, with breast milk, and then with very soft, easy to digest foods like vegetables and easy grains. And then later have introduced more harder to digest foods like meat. One thing that happened was that a few years back, doctors started recommending meat as a first food for babies, which really, if you think about it, is strange because meat is the hardest thing to digest. So why would you give that as a first food? The reason was that there were so many anemic babies. So anemic meaning that they were low in iron. And what then we found out through more research was that this was really a state of affairs that had been caused because at a certain point in human history, we were just cutting the cord right out and clamping it and cutting it right after babies were born. And so no babies were getting, you know, this blood volume that was in the placenta. And so the baby was remaking this blood, because that they can do. But what they can't do is remake the iron that is in this blood. So this blood that is in the placenta is really rich in iron because it comes from you. You gave them that iron. And when they remake that missing blood volume, they can't remake that iron. So they are low. And this is probably the research that started to drive the shift to delayed cord clamping and away from just cutting the cord immediately. Because what the research was showing is that when they were looking at babies that were 2 months old, 6 months old, even 12 months old, the researchers were able to see a difference in the iron levels, even that far out from birth, for the babies who had delayed cord clamping, meaning that the placenta was allowed to send that blood into the baby's body. And so that really reduced the risk of anemia in the first year of life for babies across the board. And that's one of the reasons that we started to see the shift on the medical side of things. I always like to think about the energetic side of things as well, and like making birth the most gentle experience possible for a newborn. So when a newborn is born, there's a lot of shifts that's happening inside of their body, and they have to basically go from being like a water breather in certain sense to an air breather, right? It's a complete shift in the way that their body, even the way the heart pumps, there's just a lot of changes that are going on in that first couple minutes of life. And when the placenta is allowed to pulse, not only are they getting the blood, but that blood, because it's coming from the placenta, is rich in oxygen. And remember that the entire time that they were in utero, that's how they were getting their oxygen. And so while they're starting to inflate the lungs, which takes some effort, that's why they cry, while they're inflating the lungs and they're making all these inner transitions inside of them physiologically, they're also getting the oxygen from the placenta. So they're having a continuous supply of oxygen during that transition. If we cut the cord, it's a much more abrupt feeling for a baby because they've got to get the air from the oxygen, right? So if we're looking at it from just making it energetically much more gentle and loving, then letting the cord pulse has some benefits that way. Now let's talk about some of the downsides to letting the cord pulse. So when babies have their total blood volume, that means that they have greater blood volume overall. And that increases, small, but it does, increases the risk of jaundice. So what is jaundice? Jaundice is when the baby is born, there are some blood cells that are going to die, and the liver and the kidneys are still not functioning. So the lungs come online within the first 2 minutes of life, but the kidneys and the liver take a little bit longer. So it's kind of a day or two, maybe 3 days before they start to function fully. And we need the liver and the kidneys to be able to flush out the bilirubin. And bilirubin. This bilirubin is this sort of a byproduct of when the blood cells break down. And because the body can't flush it out yet, it builds up. And if it builds up to a certain critical level, it can cause damage in the body. And you see it on the outside because of the color. The babies turn like a little bit yellow. And the happy thing about it is that there is a very gentle, natural way to break down this bilirubin, and that is light. So just sunlight and bright light, warm light, light breaks it down, and then the baby's body is able to flush it. And like I said, this is only an issue in those really first couple days of life until the kidneys and the liver really start functioning fully. Now, as I said, there is a small research, but there is a small increase in the risk of jaundice when the cord is allowed to pulse because of there just being more blood overall in the baby's body. But I think what's really important to note is that in the research, it's not so much of an increase that it creates clinical jaundice, right? So clinical jaundice is where we actually have to treat it. And just so you know, how we treat babies with jaundice is we lay them in a little bed with a bright light over top of them for a couple hours each day. So it does require you to stay at the hospital for an increased period of time, but it's not an intervention that is uncomfortable or causes any pain for a baby. So that's important to note as well. Okay, so that is some of the benefits to delayed cord clamping. Now, delayed cord clamping can mean different things to different people. Some people will define it as letting the cord pulse for 30 seconds. Some will define it as letting the cord pulse for 1 minute, others for 2 minutes, and others will define it as letting the cord pulse until it stops, right? And so it's good to, basically, if you want the entire blood volume, you need to let it pulse until it stops pulsing, right? So however long that takes, could be 2 minutes, could be up to 5, right? Now, is there benefit for even waiting 30 seconds? Definitely, right? It's just, there's more benefit if more of that blood makes it over to baby. Okay, now let's talk about the cord banking. So the reason that the tricky thing is that it's kind of a one or the other situation that you have to choose. And that's really what I want you to figure out is, what do you feel is going to give you the best benefit for your particular family? Because right now, if we let the cord pulse, right, then there's no guarantee that there's going to be enough blood to create you need a certain amount to create a unit in order to bank it, right? And so you can go for like a 30-second delay, and still generally have enough blood to bank. And if you're missing a little bit to have the unit that you need, the amount that you need, you can like use a needle and pull the blood straight out of baby and use that, because really it's just baby's blood, right? But most parents don't feel super comfortable with that. So that's some of the things to think about. Going any longer than 30 seconds really means that there's just not going to, likely not going to be enough blood to bank it. So now let's talk about banking. Why would you want to bank the blood? So the cord blood has stem cells, and stem cells are really something that's very exciting in medical research, because a stem cell is a cell that hasn't decided what it's going to be yet. And babies, because they're just being born, they're just getting started, they have many more of these stem cells than adults do. Now, it is important to note that adults also have stem cells. You have stem cells. They're in your bone marrow, but you just don't have a lot of them, whereas baby's blood has more. And so these stem cells, because they're undifferentiated, there is emerging research that we can use them to treat certain illnesses. And the idea of the banking is that it's kind of like an insurance, it's like a sort of health insurance, that if there was some of these childhood diseases that came up, like leukemia or type 1 diabetes, that you could use the stem cells to help treat it, okay? And now, right now in Canada, we don't have a national public registry for umbilical cord blood. It's coming, but it's not quite there yet. There are some small public banks through the Canadian Blood Services, for example, out in Quebec and Ontario. But that's kind of it right now. Now, there are privately funded cord banking companies, and this is going to cost you, for the initial banking, it's going to cost you about $1,500 up to $2,500 to do the initial banking. And then the cord blood is frozen, and it does retain all its benefits while frozen. And to pay to upkeep it, because of course, you need to have it stored properly in order for it to be usable later, you have to pay an annual fee of about $100 to $150 each year. Now, currently the Canadian Society of Obstetrics and Gynecologists, as well as the American Academy of Pediatricians, are both recommending against the private banking, because there's just not enough scientific evidence yet that there's enough benefit there. Now, there are some stories out there that it can be helpful. So, for example, there was a child who got diagnosed with childhood type 1 diabetes. The mother had banked the cord blood, and they were able to use the stem cells from that cord blood in his treatment levels, and he was able to increase the production of insulin in the pancreas by to a third of what is a normal pancreas function. So he had a much greater reduction in the amount of insulin that he needed to take. So there are stories where this can be, truly helpful. But some things to kind of consider is that currently the odds of needing those particular cells is very low, and that sometimes people also consider it an insurance, health insurance for the entire family. So maybe the child doesn't need it, but someone else in the family might need it, and that can be truly helpful. Although also consider that there's only a 25% chance that someone in your family will be a match, because you need to be a match in order for those stem cells to work. So it's still only a 25% chance. Now, of course, if you have, let's say that you have 3 kids and you've banked all 3 kids, well, those chances are now, there's a 25% chance for each each kid's stem cells, right? And so then your total chances of having stem cells that will match someone in your immediate family increase, right? So that's why generally if you are planning to do this, as an insurance policy, it's more effective if you bank the blood for each child. The other thing that's to consider is that there are often not enough stem cells in the cord blood to actually treat an adult. There's often just enough to treat a child. So it can be effective for a childhood illness, but it may not be effective for an adult illness because there's just not enough of those stem cells. So that's some of the things to kind of consider as you're weighing this. And one of the things that I always teach the families that I work with when they're trying to make a decision, because as this whole pregnancy, you had to make decisions, and it's going to be no different when you're a parent. You're going to have to make decisions for what you feel is best for your baby once baby is, on the outside. And through birth as well, you may have to make some decisions. So I like to teach this little acronym, and it's called BRAIN. And here's what it stands for. So the B is for benefits, the R is for risks, A is for alternatives, I is for intuition, and N is for nothing. So let's just use that to help you get clarity here. So when you're sitting down and you're kind of weighing this out and deciding what you're going to do for your baby, think about those benefits, right? So there's benefits to the cord banking. There are benefits to delayed cord clamping. And what I want you to do is write them out for yourself. You can rewatch the video if you want to, but write them out for yourself and see which weighs more heavily, right? So because there might be circumstances, for example, if you have a family history of diabetes or leukemia or immune deficiency diseases, that would weigh more heavily towards the benefit for cord banking, right? So weigh this out so that you can decide which benefit is greater for you. And then note the risks, right? And see, how the risks play in. And then look at alternatives, right? So, with the cord clamping, there's no real great alternatives for getting that missing iron other than, feeding them iron-rich foods. So sometimes they've now added iron to pablums, for example, right? Would be an alternative. When you're thinking about alternatives to cord banking, then you can look at, using the public banks, because my husband, he gives blood regularly, and Canadian Blood Services actually just asked him if he would donate the stem cells from bone marrow. And then what they do is they hold that and they take basically a profile of it and they hold it. And then if anyone needs stem cells, if his stem cells are a match, then they would just use them. So that is something that is also happening with adults through Canadian Blood Services. So that would be an alternative to that. So kind of thinking about the alternatives. And then what does your intuition say? So for that, you just have to close your eyes, feel your heart, and just figure out what is truly your intuition saying about this. And then making your decision from there. So I hope this was helpful for you. If it was, like I said, please share it. And if you have more questions for me, I love doing this stuff. My heart is truly in educating and helping you have, like I said, a better pregnancy and a better birth experience. So if you have more questions, please send them my way and I will make more videos. Okay, that is it. Over and out for today. Have a lovely rest of your day. Bye.